I have the opportunity now to introduce the third in our trio of presentations this morning, and we're lucky to actually have a duo. I'd like to share with you that the first of those is Kedren Crosby, who is the president of Work Wisdom. Kedren holds a master's degree in policy science from the University of Maryland, graduate level certificates in nonprofit studies from the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and conflict resolution at Notre Dame. And she's completed organizational coursework at Harvard University as well. Kedren is also a certified practitioner of emotional intelligence and serves as an adjunct graduate school faculty at Elizabethtown College. And she's written and presented extensively on burnout, work-life integration, authentic leadership, organizational culture, and communication best practices. She's here today with her colleague, who's also associated with Work Wisdom, Sarah Colantonio. And Sarah, with her Master's of Science in Communications and Bachelor's in Psychology, has served as a professor as well, Communications at both Millersville and at Penn State since 2003. In addition to her expertise in high-performance communication, that's both verbal, nonverbal, and written, Sarah has practiced mindfulness since 2004. She's a certified meditation instructor and has done mindfulness training through the University of California, Berkeley. And her specialties with Work Wisdom include mindful work and authentic communication. They're here today to bring us to sort of the cusp of this trio with a presentation that is called From Conflict to Collaboration. Please help me in welcoming both Sarah and Kedren.
Thank you, Judy. Thanks so much for having us here today. And thanks for your flexibility in reorganizing the agenda. I think I was supposed to go second, and I'm going third because I just flew in from Florida, and my flight was delayed. So thank you so much for your hospitality. This is such a fantastic group. We're from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We travel quite a lot. Wait, was there someone else from Lancaster? Hello, fellow neighbors. So we're thrilled to make new friends in this neighboring community and teach you a little bit about what we're really passionate about, which is how you transform conflict into something really constructive and creative and collaborative. So thank you so much to Jody and Virginia for inviting us in. But I also want to say thank you to Dana Morris-Jones. Dana Morris-Jones, she's an author, but she was a professor of mine at Hopkins when I was studying organizational behavior, organizational conflict resolution, and she was a real inspiration to me because she taught me how to self-reflect on my own styles of dealing with conflict. And I came to learn that the way that I was dealing with it wasn't all that great, and that I could really improve my life quite a lot if I grew in some self-awareness, had some new scripts that I could put on heavy rotation, and then adopted some new behaviors. So really that's what we're trying to do here today. Our goals are really around how do we do that for all of the women here, and the men too. I like that there are men here too, that we can grow in self-awareness, we can add some new scripts into our language that just becomes familiar, muscle memory, and that we can also have some new behaviors that we can go to when we're experiencing conflict and it's not turning into the constructive kind of conflict.
Does that sound good? Sound doable? All right. So we wanted to start with an icebreaker where you get to talk to a stranger. But first, and since we got to listen to that great theater piece earlier on, maybe you're kind of in the drama mode. But in your packet, you'll find a Work Wisdom, which is our company sheet, and it has a list of, on one side, triggers. Conflict triggers, and on the other side, a list of responses or scripts. And so what I would like for you to do is find somebody that you don't know. It might mean moving to another table. And I want to give you an opportunity. You're going to have a chance to be the person who lobs one of the conflict triggers. So there's a list of them you can see on the left side. So pick your best one that you can think of. And then the other person is going to pick an appropriate script to respond. So you can take a look at those. And you'll do that 3 times, and then you'll switch. And once you're finished doing this little icebreaker, then you can go sit down. So go ahead and find somebody nearby that you don't know very well and practice this.
We'd love to hear a little bit from any of you. Was that hard? Was that easy? Was it helpful? Was it confusing? Is it anything that, all of the above? Yes. Interesting. Okay. The reason why we actually put this together is because so many people had said to us, we just don't have the right words, and we don't always know how to come up with the right words at the right time. So we thought, okay, if we just script out a whole bunch of different scripts that you can go to when you're in a conflict situation that are mostly always productive, we thought that might be helpful to you. So we're hoping that that can be something that you use with your family, with your teams. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that was not sort of a linear exercise. It's more like a matchmaking, so a trigger, you lob a trigger, and then the person on the other side gets to evaluate all of those scripts and select the one that they think is the most appropriate, and then they do the matchmaking. So if you take that home and use that with your friends and family and your teenage children, that's the way that you'd want to be using it. So before we get into how do we go about transforming conflict into collaboration, I just wanted to explore the notion that conflict and collaboration are not actually as far apart as we think they are. So in their essence, both conflict and collaboration are the practice of managing differences. They're really both about managing differences. It comes down to how you choose to manage those differences, whether or not it turns into conflict or something that looks more like collaboration. So just having that mindset that conflict and collaboration are really only a couple bubbles away, and that it's very often up to us to choose, is this going to turn into something that spirals out of control, or is this going to be something that's really constructive and productive and helpful? So a lot of what we want to do today is share that notion that that locus of control can really come to you if you embrace some of these mindsets and practices. We also wanted you to remember that conflict, more than anything, maybe not more than communication, but conflict is a form of communication, is really probably one of the greatest impacts on your personal life and your professional life and the success of your teams. So it is definitely worth the investment to learn a little bit more about what is conflict, what are some tools to learn about conflict, because if you're interested in having optimal outcomes in your personal life, in your professional life, and in fostering really healthy teams as leaders, as you all are, it's a worthwhile investment.
Okay, so let's make this real. I'm not going to make you get up this time, but I'd like for you to turn to the person next to you, your neighbor, somebody near you, and you don't have to go into all the gory details, but just in a few lines, talk about the main kind of conflicts that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, like 2 or 3 lines, and sort of share amongst yourselves, and then we'll talk about that. All right, So, and it's kind of fun to talk about them too, because it's common to being human. We're going to have differences. We're going to see things differently. We're going to have different wants and needs and desires and all of those things. But what we want to talk to you about next is how we can make this transformation, moving from conflict into something that's really helpful.
So how do we do that? How do we take these conflicts that you all have top of mind right now because you were just thinking about them, maybe even some of your the feelings that our bodies feel when we think about our conflicts. So how do we do that? How do we transform these conflicts into something that looks like collaboration, that's constructive, that's creative? So first, I'm going to tell you a story, and this is for anyone who's ever studied conflict. I'm sure you've heard this story. So please enjoy my rendition of the story. If you haven't heard it, congratulations, you're hearing the story for the first time. So this is a famous story from Getting to Yes, which is the seminal work on how to transform conflict into collaboration. From the Harvard Negotiation Project, Fisher and Urey. So there's a husband and a wife, and so many conflict stories start out that way, right? Oh boy, okay. So there's a husband and a wife, and there's one orange left in the house, only one orange, and they both desperately want the orange. And they go round and round about why they each deserve the orange. And so he goes really high competing, and he says, well, you know, I deserve the orange because my salary pays for the groceries around here. Oh, right. So she snaps, right, back to him, and she says, I deserve the orange because I was the one who had the brains to go grocery shopping to get the orange in the house when I knew I was going to need it. So you have two people who are what we call high competing. They both are being very assertive in trying to get what they want. You can't have two people stay at that space for very long. So eventually they say, fine. We've all been there, right? Let's just cut it in half. We'll compromise. So they take their knife, they cut the orange in half. He takes his orange, he comes over here, he peels the rind, he throws away the rind, starts eating the fruit. She takes her half, she peels the rind, she throws away the fruit, she takes the rind, she starts zesting it. And I'm so glad I don't have to explain that because it's a bunch of women, right? Zesting, you all know what that means. Usually when we do this, people are like, what? So she starts zesting it because she's making biscotti and she needs the orange rind to flavor the biscotti. So, so my question to all of you, what would have needed to happen so that he could have gotten all that fruit and she could have gotten all that rind? Tell me what would have had to happen. Right, they would have had to communicate. Specifically, what would they have had to ask each other? What do you really want? Why do you really want that? I love that you know this. We can leave now. So they get it. So that is the key question. What do you want and why do you want that? We want to figure out what the other person wants and we want to know what we want. And that's how we craft collaboration.
So, and Suzanne talked about this when she talked about negotiation, so it's key for that as well, but also collaboration is part of that as well. So there's actually this really simple exercise that you can do, and it's something we're going to practice right now. So, yeah. So it's called the platinum rule. Everyone's heard of the golden rule, I'm sure. The platinum rule has just a little extra bling to it, I guess, where it asks of us to do to others as they would have you do to them, what they want. What do they actually want? How do we get there, though? We have to ask the question. We have to say, what do you want? And why do you want it? So in this exercise, here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to the person next to you. Now you've gotten to know them a little bit. and you're gonna get a chance to ask each other what you want. So what I'd like for you to do is you're gonna go first, and you're gonna ask the other person, what do you want? And they're gonna answer. And then you're gonna ask it again, what do you want? And they're gonna answer again. And you're gonna do it 5 times total. If you're not great at math, then just count on your hand.
That's what I do.
Yeah. And then you're gonna switch. And then they get to ask you, and you get to answer. So you don't have to think too hard about it. It could be that you want lunch, or that you want a new car, whatever it is. Just whatever comes to mind. And then when you're finished, you can just go back to staring straight ahead. All right, go ahead.
Go back to not talking.
All right, let's finish up. Let me have your attention.
Okay, let's debrief this. We want to hear from you. That's great.
Okay. All right, so anybody want to tell me how it felt to be asked, what do you want? How did it feel? Awkward. Good. Awkward, good. Did it get easier over time? By the 5th one, where you're like, I know what I want. The first time, what's this?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
It gets deeper.
World peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine.
So imagine if you had more time just asking that question. There's something about the repetition. It gets into deeper things, more important things. It's really powerful. I admit I cried the first time I did that practice. I'm just going to admit it. But oftentimes we forget to ask. We forget to ask the question. And then when we're asked it, we don't even know what to say. Nobody ever asked us, so we're not even sure. We have to investigate. And so this is key to collaboration. This practice is so simple and so helpful for the collaboration process.
So we're going to learn about our own predisposition to how we manage differences. And so we have some volunteers who are going to pass out an assessment for us. And so I thank you to the volunteers who are doing that on our behalf. So don't take it just yet. First, I want to describe the model. So every conflict that you've ever had in your entire life, yes, back to kindergarten, and every conflict you will ever have in your entire life going forward really has 2 dimensions. And the one dimension is, how assertive are you going to be in getting what you want? So that's the one dimension. And I have this drawn up here. How assertive are you going to be in getting what you want? And then the other dimension on the lower axis is, how cooperative are you going to be in helping the other person get what they want? So it really comes down to those 2 things. And then within those 2 dimensions, there are a million right answers, and there are a million wrong answers. And so none of the styles are good, and none of the styles are bad. Everything is situational. Sometimes it makes sense to be a high competitor, to be extremely assertive in getting what you want. When's the time that it makes sense to be highly assertive in getting what you want? Just shout one out. Yes, thank you. Medical, yes. It's life or death. If there's a safety issue, if it's medical, yeah, we're going to be really assertive, aren't we? When's another time that it makes sense to be highly assertive in getting what you want? Financial, yes. Other things like ethics, whistleblowing. There are times when we need to speak truth to justice. We tend to go highly assertive in getting what we want then, and we're less cooperative in helping the other person get what they want. Sometimes it makes sense to not be very assertive at all and not be very cooperative at all. And we call that avoiding. When's a time that it makes sense to just be an avoider? When it's It's not your fight. Yeah, I'm not getting involved in this. Anybody else have an idea? When's another good time to avoid? Politics, okay, especially if you're a fundraiser. Never bring it up. Or religion, just avoid. Yes, that can be really helpful. And actually in conflict in general, when we need to let the dust settle, when we need to let cooler heads prevail, when we want to have some impulse control, avoiding is a good place to go for a little while. So other times we want to be incredibly cooperative in helping the other person get what they want. So much so that we'll sacrifice what we want. Can any of you women think of a time that it makes sense to accommodate? Not all the time. Not all the time is the answer. But yes, we tend to be socialized to be more accommodating as women. So some women feel that it's worthwhile learning how to practice being more assertive so that they are less accommodating all the time. But sometimes it does make sense to be accommodating. Let's say it's your husband's birthday and he wants to go to that steak place and you're vegan. Okay, it's his birthday, we'll accommodate. When you have low power, someone else has high power. When you're trying to ingratiate yourself to another person, accommodating is the place to go. And now then there are those two other places, which are compromise, which is really where we split the difference. We remember the orange. They split the difference. Neither of them got what they wanted. And I'm not sure, Suzanne, did you do this in your presentation? Okay, thank you. Because I'm like, oh no, maybe I'm doing your presentation over. So compromising is where you're splitting the difference. You're not getting everything you want. They're not getting everything they want. You're just sort of cutting it in half. It's not a win-win. And then collaborating, that's the one that so many of us talk about. In our workplaces, it seems like collaboration is the buzzword of the decade. So collaboration, true collaboration, requires that you know what you want and you're going to be assertive in getting it, and you figure out what the other person wants and you help them get it, and then you craft a mutually agreeable solution. So really those are the 5 styles, and most of us have some clear predisposition for how we show up. Now when I took this assessment, the sort of more rigorous psychometric version of what you're about to take, I found that I was an avoider. And I thought, what? I'm like this powerful woman, that's not me. And then I kind of looked at my life and I was like, oh right, I quit that job because I just didn't want to deal with that. And I left that relationship because it just got messy, you know. And so I realized, oh, behaviorally, yeah, I kind of was an avoider. But that was good news because I learned it, and then I was able to figure out, how do I become more assertive in, first of all, figuring out what I want, and then going for it. And also more curious about trying to ask others, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And then trying to craft something that's really mutually agreeable. So what I want you to do now is just take a couple of minutes, go through the questions. They're not questions, they're statements. On the first page, I think it's front and back, there's a series of statements, and what we want you to do is circle the one that sounds most like who you are. So once you've gone through all 15 of those statements and circled the one that sounds most like you, you'll see that there's a key attached. And you can start noticing whether or not you too have a predisposition. So spend a couple of minutes with that assessment. That is a version of what's called the Thomas Kilmann instrument. You don't have the assessment. My wonderful volunteers, does anybody have any left? Do we have any more copies? Look how accommodating all these women are. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Does everybody have one now? And this just will give you a sense. You'll just be looking for patterns, and feeling whether or not, is that true?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I see here too.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I get it.
yeah.
All right.
So as you notice maybe that you have a more dominant style that you go to, it's important to remember, again, like Kedren said, none of these are good or bad. Really the key is that you learn what your predominant style is and become agile in moving from style to style. Anybody surprised by the outcome? No? Yes? Oh, okay. Somebody asked if it's close. Well, then it just means that you're a little more even in your choices as far as where you tend to go. It's time to report out. All right, where are my soulmates, my avoiders? Stand up if that was your predominant style. Go ahead and stand up, avoiders.
My people.
There's no shame. Okay, avoiders. All right, you can sit down. How about accommodators? Is everybody going to stand up for that? Stand up if you are predominantly an accommodator. Okay. Bless you all. All right, let's sit down. All right, what about my competers? Stand up if that's your predominant style. All right. All right, and then, am I missing one?
Collaborators.
All right, probably everybody's going to stand up. How many of you, your predominant style is collaboration? Stand up. That's your second? Okay. All right, wonderful. All right, let's give yourselves a round of applause. Okay, what I want you to do is just for a few moments, in your groups, you can talk about your different conflict styles, and I want you to address two things. One is, how has this served you? Because like we said, they're not all good or bad. Sometimes you need to be a competitor. It's the right thing to do. You need to collaborate. Sometimes you don't have time to collaborate, so you have to compromise or avoid or whatever. So talk about, in like a line or a word, how it served you. And then the second thing I want you to address is, what does it cost you? What's the cost to always running to that particular conflict management style? All right, a couple minutes, go ahead and talk about that. How has it served you? What does it cost you?
Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to talk a little bit more about concrete practices. I think we only have about 10 minutes left. So it's very helpful. What the activity that you just did.
Can we have your attention?
So the question, how has this served me? How has this served me? How has this served me? It's very helpful to think about how these predispositions have in fact served us throughout our lives. It's also helpful to think about whether or not there's a cost to these particular ways of operating. Usually, once we have a sense of how it has served us and a realistic sense of what it has cost us, we can start doing something that we call the do-over button, for those of you who went to elementary school. The do-over button is an opportunity where you can say, how would I have done that differently? And you can reflect back and think back on that situation. Usually the ones that have cost us are the ones where we think back I am granting you all the magic do-over button. So that is the gift that I have given to each of you today. So you can take that home and do over in your minds how you would have done it differently now that you know what you know. And what that does, it helps construct our new reality going forward. Now that we know what the do-over is, it helps us guide our behavior for the next time we have a similar situation. So very quickly, there are 4 tools. There are a multitude of tools that we could give you, but in the interest of time, I just wanted to give the ones that I think have the most impact, especially for women leaders. The first tool around managing conflict, I think Suzanne touched on it. It's this notion of interest-based negotiation and trying to figure out what are the underlying interests of the other person and what are my interests, and then how do we come to a collaboration. And we were kind of doing that before when we were asking each other, what do you want? Why do you want that? So interest-based negotiation really has 4 elements. It's you're separating the people from the problem. It's essential. You're figuring out what are the underlying interests of all the parties. What do they really want? Why do they want that orange anyhow? And that's when you can start getting really creative. You're figuring out the criteria by which you're going to evaluate, is this a mutually agreeable solution? And then, geez, Suzanne, what's the 4th one? I have to look at my notes. I haven't taught this in a little while. That's pretty funny. Oh, and then that's where you do the creative part, where you create the mutually agreeable solutions. So you get to know, oh, that's what you want, this is what I want. Well, we could do this, 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 this. Say Sarah wants to go on vacation someplace with water. I want to go on vacation someplace that's new. It feels like a conflict at some point, but not until we start listing out all of the mutually agreeable solutions. So places that are both new with water, and we make that list. So that's really how you go about doing that. There's also a practice that I'd encourage you to learn more about by going online or reading some books by Byron Katie. Show of hands if you know the author, Byron Katie. Okay, so it almost looks like maybe one person at every table knows her. She has a practice where she can help you kind of dismantle stories that you've been telling yourself, stories that you might have on heavy rotation that are causing conflict in your life. Sometimes these are about our mothers-in-law. Sometimes these are about our coworkers. Sometimes these are about our bosses. Sometimes these are about ourselves. So she has a practice called the turnaround, where she takes the story that you've been telling yourself and she actually turns it around. And it just gets enough light into that story, enough air and light into that firmly held story so that you can start letting go of it. And you can start saying, oh, gee, maybe that's not really true. I always thought that my boss didn't respect me. So with the turnaround, in a nutshell, it's a little complicated. Go online and practice and learn more, read Loving What Is. But what you do is you take a story that you've been telling yourself on heavy rotation, and because we're talking about conflict, a conflict story, something that's causing conflict that's not really manageable.
Can I tell my story?
Yeah, tell your story.
All right. Kedren used the turnaround on me, and I was like, oh, okay. So at one of the schools I was teaching at, I felt like my chair didn't like me, and I came home and I was kind of whining about it. She doesn't like me, and she doesn't whatever. And Kedren was like, oh, perfect, we can do the turnaround. So when you do the turnaround, the first thing that you do is you take that story that you're telling yourself, that statement, my chair doesn't like me, and you turn around to the self. And so then Kedren was like, turn around to the self. I don't like me. And I was like, well, okay, maybe, sometimes. And then you come up with 3 examples of when you don't like yourself. You know, Beverly talked about that today. Like, there's some times where we're kind of hard on ourselves. So I did that. Then the second thing that you do is you turn it around to the other. I don't like my chair. Light bulb went off. I was like, oh, whoops. Okay. And I came up with 3 examples of where I didn't actually like her. That was the biggest thing for me, because I realized this is a construction. I'm creating this conflict on my own. So then you go to the third step, to the opposite. My chair actually does like me. And then you come up with 3 examples of the truth of that. And it's like Kedren said, it's enough to shift that really hard bent story that you have in your head and make you realize, oh, this is pliable. This might not actually be true. It might feel real, but it doesn't mean it's true.
There's one last tool that I'm going to share with you, which is called restructuring, which is what we do when we are trying to take one of these firmly held beliefs that we have that has conflict in it. And what we do with restructuring is we try to grow in self-awareness about how we're showing up in that conflict. So self-awareness is part of it. And then secondly, we're using a process to help restructure our relationship with that conflict. So there's one that I like that has this very simple device, the ABCDE, so I can remember it. And what you can do is when you're having a conflict, you can walk yourself through this ABCDE. So the A is the activating event. A, activating event. So the B is the belief that you hold about that activating event. The belief that you hold about what that activating event was about. The C is the consequence. And the consequences that we have in conflict, they actually don't come from the activating event. They come from the belief that we have about that activating event. And I'll give you an example in a minute, but I just want to walk you through the letters first. So the activating event, the thing that's our trigger, and then the belief, what we believe to be true about that activating event. And then the consequences, what hits the fan because of what we believe about that activating event. And then D is the practice of disempowering or dismantling that belief. The E is the effects that you have because you've dismantled that belief. So last night at 10 o'clock, I had the unfortunate need to email Jody to say, I'm stuck in Charlotte. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get a plane to Philadelphia. So the activating event, probably from Jody's point of view, was she just received this email that is kind of messing up this wonderful event that she's put together. She could have chosen to have a belief about that, about me, which would be something like, boy, Kedren, that was really irresponsible of you to back up a gig with University of Florida so many hours before this event. But she chose to have a different kind of belief. So had she had the belief, boy, Kedren, that was very irresponsible of you, the consequence would have been something different. It would have been something along the lines of, maybe she would have sent an email that would have been a little fiery, or not that Jody ever would in a million years do that. If anyone knows Jody, she would never do that. Or maybe we would not have a close relationship going forward. But instead, she chose a different belief, which was she went to empathy. And she immediately, oh my gosh, this isn't the end of the world. Kedren, this happens to everyone. It's okay. So she chose a different belief, which got her a different consequence, which was an incredibly kind email, which made me feel better. Everything worked out. Here we are. You're still learning about conflict and collaboration. So she had a different effect. So I just wanted to introduce the ABCDE to you because it's so powerful in reconstructing how we deal with conflict. The conflict might still exist, but our belief about it can change. And it's the belief that's really powerful in terms of our consequences in our personal lives, our professional lives, in how we foster healthy teams. So that's really all we had to share with you today. We are so thrilled that you allowed us to come. We're especially thrilled that you're interested in learning how to be assertive and cooperative leaders because, as Suzanne said, the world needs that. So we're grateful to be part of your journey. Practice these things. Always feel free to reach out to us through our website, or I think our contact information is in the event materials. And we're happy to give you any more guidance that we can. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for your attention and participation.
Namaste.